further votes in other parliaments. I believe the Belgian parliament will be next on our list, and maybe the Danish parliament, to persuade them to vote the same way. Of course, it's true that even the French vote is a non-binding vote, but the French Foreign Minister, Laurent Fabius, said during the debate, promised that the French government will recognise Palestine, not immediately, but within a period of 2 years, by November 2016, before the date of the next US election. And it could be earlier than that, but basically they're saying they will recognise Palestine by November 2016 anyway, even if a full settlement of the conflict hasn't been reached by then. It's a deadline by which the conflict has to be settled or they recognise Palestine. So let's talk a bit about the decision in this building on October the 13th. We've been working on it for a long time, but nevertheless, when the result was flashed up, 274 votes to 12, it took even us by surprise that the majority was so big. And by us, I mean all those of us who've been lobbying in the run-up to this debate. 2 years ago, if there had been a similar debate in this building on the recognition of Palestine, it would have been lost. The pro-Israelis would have won. And I think what has happened during the course of this year. The MPs were very shocked, first by the deliberate torpedoing of the Kerry talks by the Israelis when they announced another settlement at the end of April. As John Kerry himself said when he was interviewed he was questioned by the US Foreign Relations Committee, when this announcement was made that they were going to build yet another settlement in East Jerusalem, poof, that was it. That was what he said. That was what ruined, what torpedoed the talks. Then we had in June, of course, we had the kidnapping of 3 Israelis, immediately followed by the burning alive of a 15-year-old Palestinian boy.
The Israelis were murdered. The Israelis weren't kidnapped, Martin. They were murdered.
Excuse me. Can you talk, and then we will give you a chance to speak here.
And then I think the MPs were very shocked by the sheer brutality of the assault on Gaza, which, as you know, killed 502 children, of which 501 were Palestinian. And then finally, the salt in the wound, the announcement of 4 more settlements in East Jerusalem, in the East Jerusalem area in September, which was what I think shocked many MPs most of all. But of course, the reason for the vote was partly because of these shocks to MPs, but also there had been a very successful lobbying campaign. And in the last 11 days before the vote, MPs received 57,800 emails from their constituents. Sure, we all want to welcome Kefale Alemu, who's just come into the room. I'm sure he will be joining us here on the platform. So, and those 57,000 emails, that's just from one website. And these are the websites where you can go and you can put your postcode in, and up comes a letter to send to your MP, and you can write whatever you like, or you can use a pro forma letter. So these letters are all from different people, and they're all from constituents. So if you think about 57,000, there are probably far more than that in total, but some individual MPs received over 1,000 emails. Now, when I was an MP, I can tell you that if I ever got more than 100 or 200 emails on a single subject, a single vote, I would sit up and listen. I would be terrified because I had a small majority, a very marginal seat. I would pay a lot of attention. So you can imagine the effect if an MP receives 1,000. In fact, some MPs, I believe, received over 1,500 emails on this topic. And so years of patient work by all the Palestine supporters and all the solidarity organisations such as the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, Labour Friends of Palestine, MAF, the Medical Aid for Palestine, Carbu, Friends of Al-Aqsa, my own organisation, Labour to Palestine, eventually paid off in the lobbying that we did on this one issue. And because, I mean, none of you have taken part in demonstrations in August. Many of you no doubt were there for the big demonstration in London, over 100,000 people, but there were demonstrations all around the country. Can be in any doubt that public opinion is way ahead of parliamentary opinion on this issue. The public has been convinced, as Manuel said, of the case for Palestinians long before the MPs were convinced about it. But the MPs are beginning to catch up, and this year they've really started to catch up. Now, in the final hours before the vote, it's quite interesting to look at what actually happened here. It became obvious to the pro-Israeli organisations that they were going to lose the vote, and what they did was they advised all of their supporters not to vote, and in fact not to ask for any division. So, under the rules of the House of Commons, the Speaker has to ask, you probably heard it on television, all those in favour say aye, and then people say aye. All those against say no. If there's a silence after that, there's nobody says no, the Speaker just says that's, the motion is just carried without a division. Nothing happens, nobody knows who's voted, but it's just the House of Commons that voted this. But if somebody says no, then, or a group of MPs say no, then it goes to a division and people have to walk around through the division office and they're counting through the division office. But probably what you don't know, it's a very obscure rule. After 4 seconds, already started voting, the Speaker has to then ask the same question again. All those in favour say aye, all those in favour say no. And then he asks for 2 MPs to count the aye lobby, the MPs in the aye lobby, and 2 other MPs to count the MPs in the no lobby. And they're known as tellers. And the job is usually done by the whips. But this was a backbench debate, not an official debate. So it was really left to the Friends of Palestine and the Friends of Israel to supply the MPs to be the tellers. Fortunately, we had a meeting before the vote took place, and we suspected that the Friends of Israel were going to not only boycott the vote, not vote, but actually not supply any tellers, in the hope that the division would have to be called off, because without any tellers, the Speaker says the division is off, even though lots of MPs have already voted. It doesn't make any difference. The division is cancelled. So we persuaded a couple of MPs who are supporters of Palestine that they would have to volunteer as tellers for the noes, so that they would be officially recorded as voting against. But obviously, we would know that they hadn't meant to do that, so that every MP would then have the right to have that vote recorded, to go around through the divisional office and be counted as voting. And the 2 MPs who volunteered were Jeremy Corbyn and Mike Wood, who I can assure you are very strongly supportive of the Palestinian cause, but they took the risk of their vote being misunderstood, because they believed in democracy. People have the right to know how their MPs voted, and if they hadn't volunteered as tellers for the noes, we wouldn't have any idea how many MPs had voted, whether they voted for or against, whether they'd been there or not been there. And we wouldn't have had that headline of the House of Commons votes 274 to 12 to recognise Palestine, which went all around the world and caused a great deal of encouragement both to Palestinians and to Palestine supporters. In fact, I spoke to a woman who was in Ramallah on the morning after the vote, walking through Al Manara Square, when she was stopped by somebody who said, "Are you British?" And she said, "Yes." And this person, a complete stranger, immediately hugged her and said, "Thank you so much." So there's no doubt about it that the vote was a huge encouragement to Palestinians. Of course, I know perfectly well, we all know perfectly well, that vote means nothing by itself. Not only was it not binding on the government, but even when the British government does blatantly recognise Palestine, and Ed Miliband, the Labour leader, has said many times that he will, it is not going to transform the lives of Palestinians. The only visible change will be that, of course, Manuel, who we always call the Palestinian ambassador, but he will formally have that title at last, rather than just Palestinian General Delegate, and the Palestinian mission will become a Palestinian embassy. In Jerusalem, the only change you'll be able to see is that a small building in East Jerusalem, on the Nashashibi Street, which currently has a sign outside saying the British Consulate General, will take that sign down and put up a new sign saying the British Embassy to Palestine. But of course, even though that's the only visible change, I mean, the vote was hugely important as a kind of cathartic moment when the British Parliament finally found its voice and stood up for the Palestinians. And also as what sailors call a wind change moment, when suddenly the wind blows from a different direction and you can do things that you couldn't do before. Because I think, as Mushtaq said in the introduction, this vote was not the end of a process, it is the beginning of a process. And that process, of course, involves persuading Parliament in this country and the government and parliaments and governments in a lot of other European countries to take the kind of measures that will make a real difference on the future of the Palestinians. So we need to persuade MPs to vote for measures that will put pressure on the Israelis to stop settlement building and to end the occupation. I think the first should be to persuade to stop UK companies from trading with Israeli settlements. The government keeps saying that Israeli settlements are illegal, but takes no action. And indeed, the EU sustains settlements with trade worth about 198 million per year. Well, that was the figure in 2013, 198 million pounds worth of trade by EU companies with illegal settlements. So the EU, while condemning settlements, is actually keeping them going. Now the next thing to persuade them to do would be to stop giving public contracts to firms that support the occupation or trade with settlements. I mean, we know many companies that do that. G4S is an example, Veolia is another example, and of course there are already campaigns against them. But these are companies that depend on public service contracts. And if British local authorities or government say, we don't want any, we're not going to sign any contracts with you, it would have a tremendous effect. This is what I call a step ladder. We're not trying to persuade the British government to go straight to BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, because we know that that's difficult to achieve in one jump, and it's not really necessary. What we're saying is there should be a step ladder. First of all, you can do this. If this doesn't work, you go to the next step. If that doesn't work, you go to the next step. And the boycott is just at the end of the line. Hopefully we can, by taking these steps, the government will persuade the Israelis long before they get to a complete boycott. But if you remember what happened in the anti-apartheid struggle, it was the same. There was a civil society boycott, but it was when the government started getting involved in taking sanctions against South Africa that the South Africans really sat up and realised the game was up. So, public contracts, if that doesn't work, then we should start using the European Union's bargaining power. The European Union is Israel's largest trading partner. 1/3 of Israeli exports go to the EU. But looked at from the other point of view, Israel is only one of many trading partners for the EU. Only 0.7% of EU trade is with Israel. So the EU is in a very, very strong negotiating position. They could force Israel to take the necessary steps simply by threatening to put pressure through trade. And the simplest way would be, as Manuel said, this EU-Israel Association Agreement. Basically, it's a sweetheart deal between Israel and the EU that all of their goods can come into the European market without any duty, and ours can go to Israel without any duty. Well, certainly all the industrial goods. That's worth, it's difficult to say how much it's worth, but if you take the average duty that we charged on any other non-European country on their goods, which is about 7%, then this deal is probably worth about 750 million a year to the Israelis. And if the association agreement was suspended, then Israeli goods would be charged duty just like any other non-European country, and that would impose a huge cost on Israel. They would lose a huge amount of trade. The association agreement is worth knowing has two clauses. One is that Israel should aim for peaceful coexistence, and the second clause, that these concessions to the Israelis are only available provided that they show respect for human rights and democratic values. Now, on either basis, the EU would be well justified in saying, well, you're not actually fulfilling the terms of our agreement. We want to suspend it until you do respect the human values of Palestinians, both Palestinians inside Israel and Palestinians in the West Bank, and you must respect the democratic values by giving the vote to all the people within that are in the West Bank as well, because an occupation lasting 43 years, 47 years, means that it's essentially intended to be permanent. Now, there was a 3-hour debate this afternoon, yesterday on Palestine as well in this building. The second long debate we had within 3 weeks, and one of the Liberal Democrat MPs actually advocated, as did some of the Labour MPs, a formal review of the EU-Israel Association Agreement, so that Israel would have to pay duty. And indeed, it's interesting that Britain has already, the EU has already suspended the EU Crimea Association Agreement. So the Crimea now has to pay duty on any goods it exports to the EU because the agreement has been suspended. So if the EU is prepared to take that sanction against Crimea, well then all the more so against Israel, which has been in illegal occupation of the West Bank for 47 years. There's only been an occupation of Crimea for a few months, and they've already suspended the association agreement. So we have the power, basically, to free Palestine through the EU.
Also the West Bank, isolated from Gaza. We have seen the destruction of institutions, and we have seen the continuous incursions of Israeli settlers into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and we have seen systematic policies of Israel trying to enforce a bill that would become a law saying that this is the Jewish state, and by Jewish state it means that 20% of the population of Israel who are Arabs are going to be denied their citizenship. The Druze who are living as a minority will be deprived of their citizenship, which means all this put together, Israel is moving towards an apartheid state. Now, Israel has built this long wall, 2 meters high, 750 kilometers, deep 10 kilometers into the West Bank to make that total separation. And you have seen all these settlements scattered all over, like cancer, where it will be impossible to talk still about the two-state solution. I cannot see a reason how we can still talk, and I am officially asked by my president still to talk about the two-state solution. But when I go home and see the settlements and see how they are so cancerous and spread, I cannot visualize a viable, contiguous Palestinian state. It is impossible to talk about the two-state solution while such policies are being still practiced. Okay. Now, this is a long topic, ladies and gentlemen, and it has a lot of complex areas where sometimes it's not easy to put them in 5 or 10 minutes for you and talk above your head in politics that are complicated. All I want to say is the recognition of the state of Palestine is not an impediment to the peace process. It bolsters the peace process. It's not an alternative to the peace process and to negotiations. The recognition of the state of Palestine says one thing, that the occupied territories are not disputed territories. These are occupied territories. All we're saying, the borders of 1967 are occupied. Israel says these are disputed territories. And the reason why we went to the United Nations and we got the recognition of the General Assembly 2 years ago is to show the international community, and by the consent of the international community, that these are occupied territories. They're not disputed territories. Now, we talk about negotiations. Yes, we have to negotiate with the Israeli side in order to draw the borders, the final borders, the contours of that state, the swapping between Palestinians and Israelis in terms of land exchange and what have you. These should be the essence of negotiations, not security, not borders, not water, not refugees. These are issues that will be settled after we sit down and say these are the borders. Then the other issues will fall. And the only ones who will, decide on these issues are the Palestinians and Israelis. It's not the United States, it's not the UK. It's what we call partners in conflict, are the ones who will decide ultimately the fate of that state and that bilateral relationship, where I believe, democracies, two democracies can survive and can have the longevity of peace. I am here a man who represents a country that is under occupation. People that have been suffering by breach of human rights. We have international violations of human rights. Our people are not living like normal human beings. They are being discriminated against in every walk of life. And that is not acceptable. So many resolutions have passed in the United Nations, but we haven't seen any of these resolutions being implemented. It's so unfortunate that the third party, which is supposed to facilitate the process of reconciling and bridging the gap between the partners to the conflict, are impotent. As a matter of fact, they are unequivocally supporting one side against the other by not putting pressures. How could we have normal negotiations when one people is under occupation, the other is occupying force? There could never be parity in negotiations. You're not talking about two equal powers, contesting a certain land dispute or what have you. You're talking about a people that is under total hostage, totally submissive to a total control through power politics, through diktat. And we claim that we are negotiating. We're not negotiating. There has never been any kind of negotiations that are serious enough to say that we give and take and we have it somewhere. Negotiations have always been the diktat of power politics. And that's why we could not reach anywhere. Because Israel comes with its own maps and imposes on the underdog what they want.
He's elected without any money in it, but I think he's here. We have got another speaker, and then he will speak, and then we will open it to the public, and we have to leave this room by 9. So I think if I ask Dr. Tariq Sulman to be brief, it would be very good. He's a teacher in teaching in SWAS, and he has a lot of things to say about this.
Reacted to that, how Israeli state is looking into different things. In spite of Palestinians being encouraged by these rightly resolutions which are recognizing their rights on Israel, it's a right-wing government which has got 2 peace proposals on the table, which is one is Lieberman's, which gives a population transfer and land transfer. And then there's Naftali Bennett's proposal of peace, which gives rather annexation of Area C, so reducing the already Bantustan there is taking place. And right now, if we see the way Netanyahu government is forcing its finance minister into calling the next general election, which are more likely to be in March, the polls suggest that Netanyahu's Likud party is going to increase its seats, and Naftali Bennett's seats are likely to be increased. So what we are looking at is that the new parliament, which is coming into existence in Israel, is not likely to take any heed of these resolutions. They are not likely to even consider a Palestinian state as far as my understanding of this right-wing party is concerned. I myself think that one of the areas where now Palestinians need to work on, because Palestinians are the only one who can impact the ultimate outcome, presenting a very conclusive decision on one of the areas, what exactly is required by Palestinians. We have seen some incongruency in even today's presentation. What is that two-state solution, which I believe has been buried a long time ago, is still being pursued by Palestinian Authority. And then Martin's very brilliant strategy of BDS, which contradicts that two-state solution in its entirety. So I think that ultimately Palestinians need to understand how to take advantage of that growing public opinion in Europe and the United States in their favor and create some kind of strategy. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very brief but very meaningful intervention. Can I invite Khalid Mahmood, MP for Berry Park and Treasurer of APPG on Third Wold Solidarity, to speak and then put it up.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Martin, who's done a huge amount of work on this issue for a very long time, and I think we could commend a lot of parliamentarians who have, for a very long sustained period, have done this, along with English Byrne from Birmingham, who from the outset has in this case has worked very hard, and their colleagues with them have done a tremendous amount of work to keep this going, because they genuinely believe the issue of people's rights, liberties and human rights. It's important to do that and challenge that. I was luckily able to get in yesterday for just about 3 minutes in the debate. And in a way, it was good. It was good because so many members of Parliament decided to participate. It was a very substantial debate in terms of a German debate. People don't get this number of debates in the German section, and we were very lucky to be able to get that done in German debate. And I think the whole dynamics, as far as I'm concerned, on the whole of The issue of Palestine and Israel has changed quite considerably. And I think what you said in terms of what's going to come into the next Israeli parliament, I think we should ignore that. And the reason why I should ignore that, I'm saying that we should ignore that, is because the whole paradigm is changing significantly. It's changing significantly because the old controls are not there anymore. The old controls on the media, on the so-called high-level politicians that were exercised previously that could actually go in there and do this. What we've got now is things like these social media. And this is becoming so powerful, it's unbelievable. And Martin talked about the number of emails we got. And I got about 15 as well. Not the first time. I've got a few for this today as well. And the fact is that it's allowed direct access to people. There are also many people in the US, young people in the US, who are starting to become aware of the issue and aware of the injustice that's taking place in relation to the Palestinian people and how it needs to be addressed. So I think as far as I'm concerned, I'm not even going to bother considering what the Israelis are doing, because they're never, ever going to be constructive on this issue. And I think the group of Zionists that we've got in control, I don't want that discussion. So every time you put something in their court, they will kick it around for as long as they can, strip it out of the ground, wait as much time as possible, and arrive at no conclusion. That's what they do, that's what they do. All the time that's what they've done for the past 6 years. And they can do that. Once they're doing that, they will build a wall of division. They will build the settlements. They will do everything they've done. They will penalize Gaza. They will completely isolate Gaza, isolate a huge number of people. If this happened anywhere else in the world, it will be considered a crime. But it doesn't get considered here. And I had to go on to make the speech that I was going to make yesterday. The issue that I would raise about the viability of the United Nations and other people like the US, the UK, European Union, how we deal with that. And we don't, because we haven't got that pressure that Martin was talking about. And it's coming. It's coming because there are significant Muslim constituents and people living in those places. That is where the pressure is coming from. And that's why, within a very short period of time, we've had now 3 clear discussions and a vote in Palestine. And that's very important to do that. In that short period of time, since what's happened in the summer, to get that, I think is hugely encouraging to me, because I can think now that we can see a way forward of moving forward. And what Martin says quite rightly, when the leader of the opposition walks through the same division lobby as you do to vote for that recognition, and the real advantage of that is going to be when that leader of the opposition becomes Prime Minister, he has bound himself to that vote. And that's the message that we should be sending out. This is not me just political campaigning for the Labour Party, but that's a fact. The fact is, when you even get up and ask David Cameron that question, and a lot of people have, and particularly people like John Kaufman, a very good friend of Palestine, somebody who has that experience of having been a Jew, but not a Zionist. And people don't differentiate that. And we need to start to look at that differentiation and get those people on side. Joel's Golden, fantastic. New nationality legislation that they're bringing in, hugely draconian and divisive. If that was to happen anywhere else in the world, there would be a huge amount of criticism. And we don't get that. And so therefore, I think what we've got to do is to look at how we work with Your Excellency, how we work with members of Parliament here, how we work within the community to get that message across. So in a sense, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not interested in talking to this side, because they certainly are not interested in speaking constructively to this side. So if they're not prepared to do that, ignore them. Because the more you engage with them, the more they think they're important. And I think what we've got to do, and the strategy that I would have, is to ignore the ones that think that they're too important to engage with. When you start ignoring them, they'll start to think, what is it that we're missing? And they need to think that, because whilst they're in a strong position, they can't carry on bullying the smaller part. They can't carry on doing that, because the tables will turn. And I only wish the tables will turn to the Golden Region as well, as they've done across the UK and as they're doing across Europe and the West. And that's what we need to do, is get some of those countries in that region to start to understand how important it is. As important as Shah Abdul-Aziz, was it? Who took the actual made a speech against then Turkey's father.
Yes.
Faisal, King Faisal, so made that speech. I only wish that some of these guys now currently in charge would have the same sort of courage to stand up and say what we want. And this issue of, getting rid of Israel and not recognizing Israel is complete red herring. Because nobody can do that. It exists, it's there, that's it. Most of the countries have said yes to it. And the Palestinian Authority have said it exists. Because it does. Let's get over that. Because that's allowed to play into their doctrine of what they say about Hamas and what they do and all those things that they make about that. We've got to move away from that. Hamas has got to take responsibility for some of the actions they've taken. Now the fact that we've got some of the authority back through the PA, Palestinian Authority, looking at it, and President Mahmoud Abbas looking at some of that, that will bring more strength. And I only wish that people in Hamas listen to the overall Palestinian Authority and work together to achieve that. That would make all of our job much easier, to put them on the back foot. And we need to do that, and we can do that continuously if we, and like people like Martin who've done this work for a very, very long time, can carry on doing that. I'm so certainly the time has now come for us to be able to make that change, and I'm sure we'll do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kefale Alemu. I think he is one of the very long-standing parliamentarians who has always spoken out on that. I think it is clear that we have to work for more MPs to come on our side in this country, that we can move forward. I think the floor is open. I think it will be very short because we have to leave, as I said, at 9 o'clock. Yes. Question, please.
Yeah, this idea Hamas, in the world, the Palestinian Authority television is full of incitement against Jews. We saw the massacre of Jews, 4 rabbis a few weeks ago, not mentioned by Mr. Hassassian whatsoever. All we heard was one side of the equation until the Palestinian Authority is brave enough and courageous enough to face down Hamas. That is the problem. Israel is not the problem. Israel wants peace. The main problem is that the inability of British MPs, like Mr. Khan, and Manuel Hassassian, to actually face down and call Hamas for war crimes. You cowardly call for war crimes against Israel, but absolutely silent on the terrorists of Hamas, unlike Daesh, ISIS, ISIL, where you're happy to speak up against. Hamas, I don't get it. Well, I do understand it.
Thank you. I will ask them to comment.
Yes. Just with
Very old
four-liner.
People's Party founder.
In fact, I have written a beautiful poem on this process.
Go ahead.
With your permission. Very brief. Gaza is hermetically blockaded, barricaded, hermetically sealed. In Palestine, freedom, children, human rights bleed. Behind the Himalayan ambitions of Zionism lurk the aggressive designs of Zionist expansionism. Apparently, the series of recognition of independent Palestinian state by many European countries is a great step forward, kind of end of stalemate. But still weapons worth billions of dollars are showered with love by Pentagon, EU on Israeli state. To run with here and hunt with the hounds cannot be a good peace bait. Let children of both Israel and Palestine meet and play at real peace gardens gate. The Israeli settlements are going on non-stop and smirk the beautiful peace, future and fate. In fact, Israeli Zionist dreams want for it all ancient biblical lands on a plate. The building of Jewish settlements on Palestinian Arab lands surely seals the peace process, future and fate. Even if the idea of two states, Israel and independent Palestine, is regarded as ideal solution till now up to date, let there be no more delay, as peace must not suffer or be late. Please be brought on the table of brotherhood and talks without rancor and hate. All the members of Security Council must bring Palestine state in actual existence before it is too late. My last sentence, my MPs, honorable friends will like it. After all, what is the harm if Israel and Palestine share together peacefully fruits of peaceful coexistence and children of both the nations play together and eat in the same plate?
Took up a gentleman calling massacre of 4 people dead. We all sat in our cozy sitting rooms over the last summer when Jewish citizens sat above the mountains with their chairs, with their cold drinks, and enjoyed the bombardment of defenseless Palestinian children and them being burnt alive. I could not ever come to terms with that kind of inhumanity in this day and age. When I read the Anne Frank's diary as a young girl, and the things that she wrote in it, I could never imagine that more girls in Palestine will be living in worse situations than that. If apartheid was not good for South Africa, certainly it is not good for Palestine. If the apartheid and Berlin Wall was not good for Europe, it is certainly not good for Palestine. If human rights are good for Western power and Western countries, certainly they also belong to Palestine. And that is what we should all speak up for and stand up for. Although this vote in British Parliament is just a moral victory for Palestinians, but it has to begin somewhere. And often it starts with the moral courage, and then it leads to action, and it leads to more better things. 135 countries in the world have already accepted, although people can disagree with it. 3 countries in Europe, Spain, Sweden has taken the lead, and Britain now. And apart from that, Latin American countries are also leading the way. Chile and many more countries are of the mind they will soon be on board. So we just need to take courage from whatever little steps are taken, and we'll keep on fighting. Million people marched in London, and they couldn't stop Tony Blair from going to war in Iraq. Million people marched every day here for Palestine. They cannot stop Israeli aggression, but they can still stand and feel the pain, and we will continue doing it until we win. Thank you very much.
Any other question? If there is no question, I will ask His Excellency to conclude, and then we will have a group photo, and that will be there, His Excellency. But let me say 2 things. I think number 1, it is very important that in this country, as Martin has said, 70% of the people of this country are in support of peaceful coexistence of Israel and Palestine. And I think we should work on that and build on that, that whosoever is elected next year, they recognize it and work for it. Although it is very hard, as Martin has said, in the Europe to go ahead with it. But I think it is our duty to keep that pressure on everybody and anybody in this country, that we, next year election on 7th of May, the results are so that we not only work for a peaceful world, a better world for our coming generation, but we also work all levels of the world to take double strength out of our normal life. If a resolution on Iraq, or resolution on Libya, or resolution on certain areas is implemented within days with force, why not a resolution on Palestine or Kashmir? And by the way, a Kashmir meeting will be here on 15th of December in Wilson Room. I usually try to book the better rooms. They are named better because I love Harry Wilson and his government when he was in government in the 60s. He never supported USA going in Vietnam, and I hope we will have one day Prime Minister of the United Kingdom who doesn't follow the United Kingdom. His Excellency will be concluded when I will say
Is it Richard?
yes.
Richard, I like people like you who come around here and try to raise, questions like this, because, it gives us ample opportunity not to preach the converted, but to convert you personally from siding all the time with the Zionists in your deliberations. Let me ask you one thing. Haven't you heard when President Abbas condemned the attack on the 4 rabbis, where everybody talked about it, even the Palestinians, some of them criticized it. He went out publicly and condemned that. Don't shake your head. Go check your story before you come here and talk about, murder.
He incited
Because-
it. He
because-
incited it. He incited it in the first place.
He did not
called-
incite
he
it.
called-
Richard, there is no debate. I
Listen,
think you
my
ask a
friend,
question.
my friend.
He asked me a question.
But I'm asking you to do your homework before you come and make accusations.
He
Secondly,
incited
if you think this is murder, if this is murder, what about Israel that has been killing thousands of innocent civilians? This is state terrorism, my friend. So don't equate, Hamas and incidents like this with what Israel has been doing for the last 47 years. Controlling people, killing them, humiliating them, making them living under occupation. And you claim that they are democratic, and we, the freedom fighters, are becoming the terrorists. This rhetoric you cannot sell such rhetoric, because people are aware. And the lady has said, she has been mesmerized on television to see how this democratic country has been bombarding innocent civilians. I have not much to say, because you don't have any argument with me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I will go for you here and then Your Excellency. Yes, a group photo. Please come around me, and I think we continue.